This is just the public garden, isn't it? Well, there's some members of Davos, as you can see. Right.
Ja, Herr Bundesrat, sehr geehrte Damen und Herren.
Mr. Federal Councillor, ladies and gentlemen, I would like very much to welcome you on behalf of the co-organizers of this event, the Switzerland United Nations Association. In 1999, no less a person than our Secretary General Kofi Annan floated the idea of the Global Compact. And so this is the, so to speak, the birthplace of the Global Compact. The co-organizers would like to thank everyone on behalf of Switzerland United Nations in the interest shown in this public event. I have circulated some materials. I've made available on the table some materials about our association. And if there's any shortage in that, any shortfall in that event, in that department, we can certainly let you have more material later. I shan't be taking part as co-organizer. I will just confine myself to these words of greeting. But I would like particularly to thank the participants of this panel, the moderator, Lukas Schmutz, who is going to be introducing himself later on to the extent that that's necessary. I think everybody knows him. We do have interpretation available, so everyone can use their mother tongue. The Global Compact, with its 9 principles, is a kind of social charter for enterprise, as you know, which underscores the importance of social responsibility and the need for transparent treatment of resources, and it attaches particular importance to human rights. Many companies across the world have lined up behind this. Others, however, have been more critical. Others, again, warn that that these are just fine words about the Global Compact, but deeds are yet forthcoming, are yet to be forthcoming. Well, we're now celebrating the 4th anniversary of the Global Compact. In our discussions, this is a first, as it were, a first progress report of what we've actually managed to implement and what we have not yet managed to, where we need to strengthen our efforts, and to what extent these things, the results are tangible in the economic and business area. And hopefully some answers will be forthcoming in the course of our discussion. It's no accident that our association, Switzerland United Nations, as co-organizers, have served as a bridge. We are an interface or a link between the many, the world of business and the NGOs and our authorities. And we certainly have an association with the most important NGOs in our country, and we are interested in hearing their views and their demands, and we also bring our authorities into this. The next NGO conference will take place on 29th of April this year. The Global Compact seek to bring the business and the environment closer together. As I say, we serve as a bridge, and we're very happy to do that. And certainly that's how we understand our commitment to this process. We want to promote the dialogue. We know that nobody can solve these problems on their own, but it is certainly a prerequisite to solutions. In combating poverty, in furthering sustainable development for the social world, there is an important role to be played here. We do everything we can in practical terms to support the Global Compact, and we will now hear from our participants, and I'd like to give the floor to our moderator. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Before we proceed to discussions, I'd like to introduce our participants. Let me very briefly outline the program and how we expect this meeting to take place. First of all, we will spend 1/2 hour with a brief introductory statement from the respective panelists, and in responding to a question which I shall put, and hopefully thereafter we will have 20 minutes of discussion among the panelists, and then the final 20 minutes will be devoted to you, will be for you, the participants, to put your questions to individual panelists. So now we will have introductions. Second to the right of me is Federal Councillor Joseph Deiss. he is a symbolic figure for the Global Compact, and he moved from the foreign ministry to the national economics department, and he's moved from foreign relations to economics. In that sense, he kind of personifies this forum. And then we have the chief executive officer of the biggest Swiss enterprise, Nestlé, who yesterday ate a very large amount of ice cream. I don't know whether it was during the dinner or afterwards. And then we have Kenneth Roth. He is executive director of the world's largest human rights NGO, the Human Rights Watch. And it's not just any old NGO. It is important to emphasize the Human Rights Watch doesn't just observe the Global Compact from the outside, but counts among the members of the Global Compact. And next to him is the fifth CEO, Samuel Di Piazza. He, as the head of PricewaterhouseCoopers, is in a different position from Peter Brabeck, that is. His enterprise is active in many areas which give him an opportunity to have an influence, a special influence on the Global Compact. Next to him, we have John Brugge. He is a professor of politology at Harvard University, but he isn't here only as an academic or as a scientist, but also as one of those who took the initiative and one of the spiritual directors of the Global Compact, and as Assistant Secretary General to Kofi Annan, was at the time one of the main initiators of the Global Compact, and today still serves on the so-called advisory board of the Compact. So this is a kind of supervisory authority which keeps an eye on the activities of the Compact. Then on the other side, we have Bernd Dixon, who is the director of the so-called World Business Council of Sustainable Development. That is an economic council for sustainable development. And this is an association of business entrepreneurs who have committed themselves with particular emphasis to these objectives. Now, let's get down to business. I would like to put the first question to Bundesrat Deiss. The Global Compact, as we've heard from the chairman, was founded right here 4 years ago. And in the 4 years that have elapsed since then, there was a relatively positive reception from public and NGOs, but that has somewhat declined. And for a variety of reasons, apprehensions have been expressed that this Global Compact may be a good idea, but that it is turning into a toothless creature. Now we have a representative of the Swiss government, and in that capacity, they perhaps regard it as one of the important areas of UN policy. So, do you find it promising? What is it about it which you find it promising, and what is it which you, as a member of the government, see as worth supporting as an initiative, and which actually displace the emphasis away from government to multinationals? The answer. Well, to whether and to what extent and how we support the Global Compact. Well, why do we? First of all, because we have a relationship to the Global Compact, as has been indicated, because it was born here in Davos, particularly with thanks to Kofi Annan. We were here too, and so we feel ourselves linked to it. But more important, as you also said, it is a good idea. What is at stake is to take globalization and to make it a much broader range of social goals, and to make it possible to achieve a broader range of social goals and objectives, and in order to achieve, to provoke or to encourage better behavior on the part of business, and to create or to shape a kind of social treaty or compact. It's not a law, the compact, but it is a commitment on the part of business to go along, to collaborate in shaping the basic rules and implementing those rules, not only themselves, but also in interaction, in collaboration with others. So I think the idea is certainly a very good one, and we therefore worth supporting. There's perhaps a third reason for Switzerland, and that is that we are a country where many we do have a disproportionately large number of multinationals with their headquarters in our countries. So there is a direct interest here in ensuring that these multinationals do see themselves as responsible actors on the international scene. The particular features of the host country where these activities are developed also need to be taken into account, we think. And in particular, it's important to promote a good image of the Swiss multinationals. And the converse is also, of course, true, that they should form a good image of the host country. Well, there is this feeling that perhaps not very much has happened in practical terms. And certainly, I think we could make much more rapid progress along this path in terms of perhaps of legislation and of regulations. There are many other areas where recommendations have arisen. I'm thinking, for example, of the OECD. So we think that the Global Compact is helpful. It is helping to promote better behavior on the part of business, better economic behavior or business behavior. And certainly we have that as the subject of the forum this year. Question, you said that it could go more rapidly, it could have more positive impact in the 4 years of its existence. Could you give us an example where you think that positive things have taken place, or that it could move more rapidly? Well, for example, the so-called Learning Forum we took place, and on the occasion of that forum, some interesting contacts were instituted, or I might also mention the possibility of mutual information via the internet about activities going on in these different areas. One of the biggest multinationals is Nestlé, and you underscored certain of the aspects of the Global Compact in that connection. Why are you so sure that you, as business people, with a business culture which is geared to business, which takes many different forms in different countries, why are you so sure that you have the know-how and you have the skill to deal with questions, to address questions which lie outside the ambit of normal business practice or business concerns? And how do you have the assurance that you can do this yourselves within business? Answer. Well, if we look at the objectives of the Global Compact, then I think that has to be the starting point. And Kofi Annan, who founded the Global Compact, said, let us look for the connection between these markets, these forces in the market, and let's look for the universals, and let us look for the creative energies which can be brought to bear by private enterprise in order to meet the needs of the underprivileged and the needs of the poorer nations, and so on and so forth. That, so far as concerns the objectives. Now, I could say that not only today, but since the foundation of Nestlé 140 years ago, these objectives are entirely consonant with our own view of the world, and hence our participation in it. But why did we hesitate? Because we wanted to be quite certain that we clearly understood what lies behind these words. And that's why we carefully studied what a participant would be required to do. And we tried when discussed internally whether these values are actually going to be represented, whether the values of the global compact could be 100% applied to the Nestlé culture. And it was then decided that we could incorporate the global compact values into our own statement of values, our own mission statement. So we just wanted to be certain before we did that this set of values could also live with our own values and could be incorporated into them. Question. Well, in recent years, international human rights organizations and unions have criticized you in regard to certain labor rights and not ensuring that those were quite up to scratch or up to standards. Now, one of the 9 principles of the Global Compact says that the Secretary General shall encourage international business leaders to implement the freedom of association and recognition of workers' rights to collective bargaining, which is principle number 3. Now, can you say how this approach has been implemented in Colombia, for example? How has it changed in Colombia since you've been a member? Well, I can read out your business principles, and the first point is
freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, principle number 3. Also, für uns ist das.
So, for us, it is one of the most important parts of our enterprise policy, our business policy, that we do recognize the rights of unions, of trade unions, the right of association, and so on and so forth. And we have unions with which we have very good relations. We were among the first in Europe, for example, to recognize the European Union. The case of Colombia is a very specific one, and I might point out that the trade union in question is not recognized by by their own government. It's a parallel trade union, and this is an entirely different problem. If you read the article, you would see, of course, that what is mentioned here, this has to be regarded as an interpretation. We are told, because there are 4 members who are no longer working for Nestlé, these 4 members were allegedly killed by paramilitaries. Well, that's got very little to do with us, to be quite honest. And secondly, it is purely a question of interpretation as to how matters are represented in these announcements. This is an interpretation. This isn't really a description of what happened. It's an interpretative statement. So if we are to talk about human rights, let me talk about Article 11. Anybody who is accused of anything must be regarded as being innocent until such time as it is proved otherwise in a public proceeding, according to the law. Now, this presumption of innocence has to be upheld. Otherwise, this would also be a violation of human rights. It sounds as though the Global Compact only has to do with the continuation of already existing policies. But wasn't the Global Compact, didn't that mean that in certain areas, doesn't it actually mean that new ways and means have to be sought of promoting the objectives? Well, this is precisely the positive aspect of the Global Compact, and why we stand so positively behind it. The Global Compact isn't a code of conduct. That isn't what it is. The Global Compact is a platform for learning and for improving. It's only discussion through open and public discussion. It is only through confrontation with our critics. That's the only way that we can hope to improve. We've never said that we are 100% right. We got 240,000 of us worldwide, and of course we've got to make mistakes here and there. But the most important thing is that if we do make a mistake, then that we can react positively to it, and that we can do better in future. And that, I think, is the strength of the Global Compact. But it precisely is not a code of conduct, but it is rather a learning process. It's a process through which we can learn to do better. Mr. Di Piazza, as head of PricewaterhouseCoopers, was it rather easier to support the Global Compact or to join it? Because the idea was already there that independent auditors or independent supervisor was necessary to oversee what goes on in the Global Compact. Now, in 1999, it seemed as though the firms of auditors could be very well suited to this. But since then, we've seen what has happened to Arthur Andersen and other firms. Do they need a global compact in order to encourage them to abide by the accounting rules? And isn't that something which representatives of your sector, they need to recognize that something like the Global Compact is necessary in order to restore trust?
I do believe that you begin the conversation by acknowledging that over the last 12 to 18 months, public trust has been lost in many of the institutions we hold dear. And that is not only in business, but in government, people to people. The crisis of confidence that was created in the business world over the last 12 months that lead to many of the references you make to the Andersen demise, Enron, WorldCom, many of which were driven out of the U.S., clearly need to force change. And that change, to force business to be responsible and to be transparent and held accountable, is, I think, at the heart of the solution. Davos this week, in its World Economic Forum session for 2003, is about building trust. And when you operate in the business world, you know more than anyone else that building trust today is more important for business than otherwise. Now, I do believe that the credibility issue that you reference, that business itself and maybe even my own profession is not as credible today, actually brings to the forefront the issues that will make the global compact, the UN compact, more effective. The issues in the business world today are about accountability, being held accountable for the positions you take. They're about transparency and openness so people understand what it is you do. And in the end, they're about integrity, that you, in fact, tell the truth about your actions. Business has learned, and I believe especially in the U.S., where the crisis was so severe, business is beginning to respond. Now, why is that good for the UN Global Compact? Because I think it brings absolutely to the forefront the issues of accountability and transparency, not only on profits, but on all the issues that are so important in the UN Compact. Sustainability, human rights, the environment, labor, all of these issues are issues that business has a responsibility to their communities. And in fact, I think we've seen over the last 12 months an even increasing intent of business to move forward. I believe in many respects the barriers have been broken, and maybe we should say, if there is good to come out of Enron, it's that transparency and accountability are not just words, they now need to become actions. I do agree with you. In the end, unless you measure it and report to it, it will not happen.
Gut, also das würde heißen, dass Sie einer...
So that means that you regard the introduction of clear and controllable or supervisable standards in the Global Compact, that this is something which you would support.
Support the introduction of standards that can be applied in a broad way, yes. And the Global Reporting Initiative is part of that effort. I think the differences will come, and that this is a difference that we will debate and we should debate, as to whether they should be imposed or regulated by government, or whether business and business leaders and government and regulators should work together to develop the standards and then begin to live to them.
Björn Stigson.
Björn Stigson, part of the lack of trust that the Global Compact has enjoyed so far worldwide arises from the fact that there is a suspicion that large industrial associations or large business associations are making use of the Global Compact in order to make their companies look better by applying a UN label, better than they actually are, that is. Why are there these suspicions of this tactic being employed? Because, for example, there's a very close collaboration with the ICC, and in recent years, it is precisely in the field of sustainability and in the field of human rights that no regulation, no settlement has been arrived at, if appearances have not deceived us. So the question is, can you adduce credible reasons for expecting the sustainable development actually is not just being cosmetic, but really actually being taken on board in your organization?
Well, I can clearly say that sustainable development is clearly taken on board by the World Business Council and its members. And when I look back at the 10 years since the Rio summit, I think actually the progressive part of the business community is the one that has done the most to actually implement sustainable development. We, in the run-up to the Johannesburg summit in September, we produced 3 reports in the lead-up to that. The first one we called the vision document. We had a subtitle, The Business Case for Sustainable Development. And in that we outlined what we saw as the 10 building blocks for a sustainable society. Then last spring we produced a second report that we called Tomorrow's Markets, in which we discussed all the important trends that we saw that will shape the future of society and discuss the implications of this for business. And we did this report we did together with the World Resources Institute in Washington, which is a leading think tank. And we did it together with the United Nations Environmental Program to make sure that it was objective. And then in Johannesburg we presented a book that we called Walking the Talk. And we believe, and I believe, and there are many examples in this book, that the business community has over the last 10 years been walking the talk, and we were not at all concerned about utilizing that title. We have a very good cooperation with the NGO community. We have a very good cooperation with United Nations. We have signed in the last week actually an agreement with the UN to support the Global Compact. For us and for our members, this is not about saying things that we don't stand for. In today's very transparent world, if you say something as a company that you cannot stand for, you will be found out very quickly. You from the media, from the NGO community and others will pick that up very quickly. As a serious company, you can only say what you can stand for and what you can live up to.
Professor Orgi.
Professor Orgi, to you I would like to ask, has the Global Compact not tried in hasn't it been too disorganized in the hopes that it has aroused, and haven't the teething troubles been such that when you're looking at your that you can't that your actual guidelines aren't always applied when it comes to judging the suitability of a candidate? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that question, and thank all of you for being here. I was here with Kofi Annan in 1999 when he gave his speech, and I'm delighted to be back here today to address some of the questions and to provide an interim report on how we're going. Your question, Mr. Chairman, reminds me of a poster that my wife bought me when I was first accepted into graduate school. We've been married a very long time. And the poster had on it a picture of Snoopy, the little Charles Schulz dog character, looking very sad, saying that there is no heavier burden than a great potential. And I think the Global Compact suffers a bit from the Snoopy syndrome, if I may call it that. So many of the hopes and aspirations of people about the desire to live in a better world, in a more inclusive world, in a world in which there is less income inequality, in a world in which young children spend their time in school and not working in sweatshops or elsewhere. So many of those hopes and aspirations, which I and the Secretary General, of course, share, have been placed on the Global Compact. The Global Compact, as one of the people involved in its creation, I would be the first to say I think it's been a terrific experiment, but it cannot by itself, nor was it ever intended, to solve all of the world's problems related to globalization. We have in the world 192 governments. We need them to do their part. Yes, there are some 60,000 multinational corporations, and they need to do their part. There are labor unions, they need to do their part. There are NGOs and activist groups, and they have to do their part. As Kofi Annan likes to say, if we're going to sail through this storm together, all hands must be on deck, and they have to work together. The Global Compact, let me just simply say, first, was never intended to be a regulatory arrangement. Kofi Annan lacked the authority to impose a code of conduct on corporations. That, if he wanted to, that can only be done by the United Nations General Assembly. And our appreciation of the politics when the Global Compact was started was that that would be an utter waste of time, that it would lead to years and years of negotiations that would go absolutely nowhere. Kofi Annan's intention was quite different from developing a regulatory scheme. It was, as Mr. Brabeck said, I think at the outset, to develop an engagement mechanism. There are many things that the UN has been asked to do in the world, usually with resources and capabilities that are far short of what is needed. It was one of the fundamental philosophical premises of Kofi Annan's stewardship of the United Nations, that by itself the United Nations could accomplish very little. What it needed to do was to engage all relevant social actors and try to mobilize their efforts behind the UN's objectives and its aspirations. And the whole philosophy of the Global Compact was to create a more inclusive mechanism, a multi-stakeholder mechanism involving companies, involving labor, involving NGOs, to try to work together to advance some of the principles of human rights, labor standards, and the environment, which governments accepted for their own application, but have fallen so woefully short of implementing. So the Global Compact was an attempt to mobilize a broader international constituency to help close governance gaps created by governments not doing what we pay governments to do, which is to govern and to govern in the public interest.
Wunderbar.
Great. But as between the wonderful Snoopy story and Kofi Annan's philosophy, my question seems to have got lost. I was asking whether the Global Compact has ever thought about the right and the possibility, or using the right or the possibility, for any reason, of not admitting any given company to the Global Compact. Has that ever happened?
There are really two separate issues. One is admission and one is, if you will, expulsion at the other end. The Global Compact Advisory Council met last week, and on its agenda was the issue of criteria for participation and criteria for exclusion. So far, criteria for exclusion from the start, or non-admission, have been largely informal, have been decided upon by the Secretariat in New York in consultation with members of the Advisory Council. Have companies been asked not to pursue participation? The answer is yes. Are they based on criteria that we could spell out in sort of legal, rational terms at this point? The answer is no. It's been a political judgment in each case. The exclusion criteria that the Advisory Council has been asked to formulate have to do with persistent non-performance of the various engagement mechanisms that are embodied in the Global Compact.
Kenneth Roth, Sie sind...
Kenneth Roth, you're Director of Human Rights Watch, and as such, you're also a member of the Global Compact. When you hear this generally positive interim judgment, do you share that view, or have you the impression sometimes in your dealings with the multinationals that you have engaged in a Faustian pact, not perhaps with Mephisto himself, but with perhaps with some of his henchmen?
Well, thanks, Lucas. I think that the Global Compact is an important idea, but it has fallen significantly short of its potential. The value that I see of the Global Compact is threefold. First, it helps to inform corporations of their social responsibility obligations. And there's an important learning curve that many corporations go through, which the Global Compact facilitates. Second, the Global Compact is an opportunity for corporations to state their commitment in principle to the values of social responsibility. And it's always good to have that statement in principle because it gives you something to try to hold corporations to them. Third, particularly in comparison with other business forums, the Global Compact has been especially good at reaching out to corporations from the developing world, so that it's not just a Northern Compact or just a Western Compact, but it is really a Global Compact, and that's valuable. Where I think that this good idea has fallen short of its potential is that the Global Compact is not just any old private association. It carries the tremendously powerful imprimatur of the United Nations. And I don't think that that imprimatur should be given away too cheaply. A corporation should not be able to announce that it is a member of the United Nations Global Compact without giving something quite significant in return. But in fact, the Global Compact imprimatur has been sold pretty cheaply. The reason is that the Global Compact has pursued what is called an open tent philosophy. It has had the philosophy that it's better to get people under the tent so we can inform them about their obligations rather than to raise the barriers and make corporations jump over the barriers to get into the tent. I can understand that, but there are other organizations out there that also have an open tent philosophy. There's, for example, the very good organization Business for Social Responsibility, which sees its job as precisely that, bringing in as many corporations as possible and informing them of their obligations. I reiterate, the UN has something special to offer. It has that UN label. We should be asking more from the UN. So what more would I want? Three things. First, some pressure to comply with the standards. Not simply a statement in principle that you will apply, but actual compliance. The compact essentially leaves the compliance issue to self-reporting. Members of the Global Compact are asked to list in their annual reports or to go through the Global Reporting Initiative and describe for themselves how they have complied. The history of corporate social responsibility, though, shows that we have made the most progress when there has been pressure on corporations. 10 years ago, there were many CEOs who were very decent people, but hardly anybody had standards of social responsibility for their corporation. It took pressure. It took exposés from the press, exposés from non-governmental organizations to suddenly raise the cost of doing nothing. And that pushed many corporations to begin to adopt codes of conduct. It's going to take similar pressure to see those codes of conduct implemented. Two very obvious things available to the Global Compact. One would be to have the United Nations procurement, its purchases, only come from corporations that meet certain standards. The United Nations spends a lot of money. It should be spending that money only on corporations that are raising the bar of corporate behavior. Similarly, you can't have a club which has meaningful standards if no one is ever expelled. And behind John Ruggie's answer is the fact that no one has ever been expelled from the Global Compact. Now, it may be that we just got lucky, and all of these many corporations that have signed up are just so good that there's never been a need to expel anybody. Now, you judge that one. We need some form of serious accountability if these standards are going to be meaningful. A second challenge I see for the Global Compact is to move past these very broad, nice-sounding standards, respect human rights, respect labor rights, respect the environment, to try to make them more concrete. There is, for example, in Geneva, at the UN Subcommission for Human Rights, a man by the name of David Weisbrot, who is a UN special rapporteur in a sense, is developing quite concrete standards on human rights, what it means for a corporation to comply with human rights standards. Those should be incorporated into the Global Compact as an effort to make concrete what these broad standards, these broad principles mean. So far, the Global Compact has resisted that. The Compact needs to address the hard questions. For example, what does it mean to not discriminate against women, to have that be your principle, if you're going to operate in Saudi Arabia, where you're required to discriminate against women? What does it mean to grant a right to form an independent labor union if you're going to operate in China, where they don't allow you to have an independent labor union? What does it mean to respect human rights in the way you defend your facilities from potential violent attack if you're operating in a place like Colombia, where the defenders of your facility are murderous thugs? These are the tough questions. I don't pretend that there are easy answers to these questions, but these are the tough questions that the Global Compact should be grappling with, not floating at the level of abstract principle. Final point.
Kann ich hier gleich Peter Brabeck?
Could I bring in Peter Brabeck, because I think he's directly implicated in what's being said about the right of trade unions in Colombia, for example. That was a question brought up by Rolf. And would Nestle be prepared to include, to help to define specific human rights values, and to say, in regard to the freedom of association, we're prepared to go for that, and if it's not fulfilled, that we will then not do business in Colombia? Answer. Well, it's completely untrue, first of all, that there aren't any trade unions in Colombia. We've been working with trade unions in Colombia for the past 60 years. What I was indicating earlier is very interesting. We're being attacked not on facts, but on suppositions, supposed facts. This is something I got down from the internet, Corporate Watch. This man is dead, and we are accused of being indirectly involved, because we didn't actually employ him, indirectly having of bringing in death squads. Now, the accusation remains. So, where is what about the ethics of certain NGOs, and what about the ethics of having certain things like this in UN documents? if it's possible to make accusations like this without any kind of verification or any checking taking place. Okay, that is something we could talk about. Yes, we could talk. Talking is one thing, but if you personally come under attack, as has been the case here this afternoon, and you stand charged of the murder of somebody, you don't have to defend yourself to anybody. We're not talking about accountability here. Let's try to keep some sort of sense of balance about these things. Yeah, I think if we're talking about the human rights situation in Colombia, if you know about that situation, then you can't say that in Colombia that it is a business territory where there are no human rights problems there. And what Kenneth Roth was saying, as I understand it, is that it wouldn't be a necessary improvement for the Global Compact, not just to adopt an objective personally, but also in collaboration with other stakeholders to try to seek out new approaches to ensuring that these things happen. Kenneth Roth.
Let me use Colombia as an example of the kind of concrete case that I would like the Global Compact to address. And I'll stay at the outset. I have no evidence that Nestle is ordering the murder of labor rights activists. So let me get that off the table. We know, though, that there are many, many labor activists in Colombia who have been murdered. And we, for the most part, don't know who's doing it. They're probably, I mean, the paramilitaries are doing it. For the most part, there is no direct evidence linking any particular company to the paramilitaries. But if a company operates in Colombia, it has to be aware of this incredibly violent, dangerous environment in which any labor activity takes place. So one question I would pose to Nestle or to any other company operating there is, given this danger, what proactive steps can you take to make meaningful the right of freedom of association, the right to form a union? Maybe it takes something extraordinary. Maybe Nestle should come out and say, because we believe in the principles in the Global Compact, because we know it is too dangerous for the most part to organize a labor union in Colombia without risking getting killed, we are going to openly advocate that the workers in our plants create a union. We are going to make clear to the paramilitaries that we accept this right, and we are going to vocally defend their right to try to fend off possible misunderstanding of traditional company opposition to a union, to make clear to the paramilitaries that Nestle believes in this right and wants it to be exercised.
Der Punkt ist klar geworden, wollen Sie noch?
Okay, I think that's clear. Do you want to come back again, Mr. Brabeck?
First of all, it is very interesting, and I have no doubt that what you're saying is absolutely right. There have been labor union people killed in Colombia. May I tell you that I have Nestle people which have been killed in our factories, people coming into the factories and killing our people, okay? And not one NGO has gone out in order to defend their life? Why is this? Okay? Because you can only see one part of this thing. Now, nobody has come out and has said, how happens that last year we had 4 women, not only employees, the women of our employees have been kidnapped, okay, have been taken for 4 months during the whole Christmas period and New Year's period, and not one voice was heard from nowhere who was going out to defend the people who are working for our company. Now, I think you have to see a little bit more carefully and not say, labor union, I know that labor union people have been killed, but I also know that hundreds of thousands of completely unguilty people have been killed in this conflict, and it is not only one side. And I am more than willing to help and to get involved in order to overcome this thing. Secondly, you are saying we should be doing something in order to create labor unions for Nestle. We have labor unions for Nestle. Each of our plants has a labor union. I don't have to create it, I have it, and we have very good relationships with our labor unions. And third, that we are taking care of them. The most interesting thing is that we are being accused because we do not take those 4 people into our company, and they want to become into our company because they are afraid of paramilitaries. And they know that if they are within our company, they would be better protected. So we are not by any way showing you clearly that, first of all, We are for labor unions, we have the labor unions, and I think we should be very careful when we accuse in one side that we also take into consideration the other part of it. And believe me, when you're losing your own personnel in a blood-coded manner, when people goes into a factory and kills their human resource manager for having done nothing, okay, well, then you start to look at it a little bit more balanced.
Zurück zur Ausgangsfrage.
So coming back to our initial question, what would Switzerland, or what should nations do to increase respect for the binding nature of the Global Compact objectives? And you've indicated that in other platforms and other fora, this is done in different ways. Is that sufficient, or must there be greater liability, greater commitment within the Global Compact itself? Well, I don't think it's the case that we're not doing what we're not supposed to do. The objective was to preclude lengthy negotiations before we could come to any sort of a agreement or any kind of contract or something of that kind. There are other organizations that do that kind of thing. What we were trying to do, as Mr. Brabeck has said, what we were doing was introducing a learning process, and I take note that there are various possibilities of doing this. I'm thinking of the institutionalized dialogue which is taking place. I think of the on a forum or other possible partnership projects. Let me give you an example. In Berlin, recently there was a learning forum. There's some 100 enterprises took part, and in the most diverse sectors, in prevention of armed conflict, in AIDS, in the workplace, and so on. We had an exchange of experience going on at that meeting. I think it's important that we shouldn't be criticized just because there are lots of other problems to be resolved. Question, what is the position on the Global Compact itself? There's work going on in the Subcommission for Human Rights. Is it part of your business to check whether the principles of the Global Compact could be incorporated into that?
Principles of the Global Compact are based on declarations or conventions that are universal in character, which governments have already adopted. The 9 principles are drawn from the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the ILO core labor standards, and the Rio principles. So it is the job of other entities in the UN system to help implement those conventions. Everyone is supposed to be implementing the principles of the Universal Declaration. May I respond to the labor issue?
Sure.
Because it puts in very concrete terms how hellishly complex these issues can become. When we first started the Global Compact, and we didn't start it in 1999, it was only July 2000, so it's just 2 years old. We faced an issue immediately. We wanted to involve companies that did business in China. There is no freedom of association in China. In fact, the laws are against it. What should we have done? What we did was we approached our labor partner, the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions, and asked, what do you think we should do? Should we exclude companies from the compact because they operate in China? Should we ask those, question number 1. Question number 2, should we ask those companies to break Chinese law and risk getting thrown out? Or 3, is there an alternative? The International Confederation of Free Trade Unions came back and said, obviously, we want to engage with companies that are in China. 2, no, you cannot ask them to break the law of China because they will be thrown out. 3, what we would like to do is we would like to work out arrangements, experiments that would increase the rights of workers in China without breaking Chinese laws. So through a process of consultations, which eventually involved the Chinese government, the Global Compact began a project, which is ongoing now, on the rights of handicapped workers in China, of whom there happen to be 150 million. Now, handicapped workers are not all workers, but it is a category of workers that the Chinese government permitted us openly to have a process of engagement about in China. Now, in our point of view, the way you produce change when the deck is stacked against you is one step at a time. And the fact that we are now dealing with a fundamental issue of workers, even if it's only 150 million of them, is better than was the case yesterday. And these are the complexities and the dilemmas that we face every day. Usually our responses have been fairly pragmatic as long as we see progress at the end of the day.
Vielleicht noch eine kurze Reaktion von Sam.
Perhaps a short reaction from Mr. Di Piazza.
Several reactions. First, the concept of standards, how standards might be developed and applied. And I give one piece of advice as a professional who spends his life trying to apply standards into business. Typically, the answer results in a very complex series of extended, detailed rules of compliance in trying to achieve an end. Our experience after decades is that the more complex, the more detailed, the least amount of results you get. Now, maybe we need to go beyond 7, 9 sentences. Maybe we need to create a framework. But I would say to you, as you try to drive standards into the Global Compact, do them at the principled level, and then ask for disclosure. There was an incredible result in the U.S. A decade or so ago around the environment. And the U.S. government was trying to control toxic release. And rather than prescribe the formula, what the U.S. government said, disclose the result. All companies had to disclose what their performance was, whatever it might be. The net result was companies understood if they disclosed a bad result, they would be damaged in reputation. They changed. So I do believe that there's a better answer. One last observation. We just completed a survey of companies all over the world on a lot of different subjects, 1,000 CEOs. Now, this group of CEOs, among the questions we asked was, what are you most worried about? Well, terrorism was at the top of their list, but just as high was overregulation, just what you would expect. But we asked the same group of CEOs about issues of sustainability and how committed are they? Over 50% of the CEOs found it a boardroom issue, a long-term shareholder value issue, an issue that had to be dealt with. And interestingly, 83%, and this is to support John's comment, said they couldn't do it alone, they needed the help of government. So that says business believes there is a role of partnerships, and I think that is a significant change from what you would have seen before the Global Compact.
Herr Stickson, würden Sie das Gegenteil?
Mr. Stickson, would you maintain the opposite?
Discussion here about what do you report on and standards and so on. I think the Global Reporting Initiative was mentioned before. I am a board member of the Global Reporting Initiative representing business. And this is a voluntary initiative that has come together involving NGOs, labor, business. And the reason that we are involved is from all these, from the NGO community and from labor unions and from business. We don't want governments to set these principles because we believe we are doing it better in an interaction and a discussion between us. Having regulations from the top by bureaucrats in the government on how this should be done, we think will be a much less useful way to go than what we are doing now together. And we have established jointly an institution. We are trying to take it forward. But we are also seeing a lot of difficulties in finding ways of measuring things. How do you measure some of the social performance? What are the indicators? And we have a lot of work ahead of us before we have good indicators so we can really report it. And also then have something that Samda Piazza and his colleagues and others can verify. We are not at that stage yet where these indicators are really solid. The other comment I would like to make is that as I represent a number of big companies and interact a lot with civil society and governments and others, there is a tendency in the debate to always ask for something more. Companies, as I said before, I think have done a lot to address these issues. And I think many companies are very proud for what they've been doing. And when they tell that we've been doing this, they always get the reaction, yes, but you should also do this and this and this and this and this. There is very seldom there is any recognition for what has been done. There is always something that you should do on top of things. And I would recommend parts of civil society to give some more recognition to people that are doing things. I think some positive recognition will make companies much more willing to do things than if they do something, they put their head above the parapet, then they're beating over the head and say, you are not doing enough, you are doing something which is not good here, there, and there. No company is perfect, but give some recognition for the ones that are trying to do the right things.
Noch eine letzte Bemerkung von Ken Roth.
A final comment from Kenneth Roth, and then we will take questions from the audience.
Right. Well, 2 points. One with respect to the positive recognition. That's a valid point, and we try to do that. Human Rights Watch spends a lot of its time in the oil industry, and we very openly say that British Petroleum and Royal Dutch Shell are these days doing a good job of being socially responsible. They're conscientiously trying to apply these principles. In the footwear industry, Reebok is doing a good job. In the apparel industry, Philips Van Heusen. So there are companies that are leaders, and we're completely willing to say that. On the question, though, of regulation, I think there has been a kind of a false dichotomy presented here between, on the one hand, just abstract principles, and on the other hand, over-regulation. There's something in the middle, which I think the Global Compact should be doing more of, but isn't. This whole field of corporate social responsibility is a new and dynamic field. And arguably, it is too early to prescribe regulations, because you don't want to write regulations that are outdated. We're trying to raise the bar gradually. But what the Compact could be doing is developing case studies, examples of best practices. So, for example, take the issue of free association in China. I'm very glad that the Compact is working to help disabled people in China, but that's not doing anything to solve the problem that there is no free association in China. There is no right to form an independent labor union. So let's look at some of the companies that are doing interesting things to work around that, not to violate the law, but developing worker consultation organizations within their workplace that kind of look like a labor union, but just aren't called that. And let's, develop those examples, publicize them, hold them forward as a best practice, and actively encourage other members of the Global Compact to do that. That's the kind of proactive work that I'd like to see the Compact doing more of.
Gut. Noch eine ganz kurze Bemerkung von
A brief final comment from Bundesrat Dice. I just wanted to say that what we need to avoid is attacking those firms that continue working with China. We have to try and help them to solve the problems. I have the feeling that they're trying to find an interlocutor through these firms because it's not possible to talk to the Chinese direct. Okay, says the moderator, we now go to the audience. Would you please identify yourselves and put your questions to specific members of the panel? Questions, please.
Eine erste Wortmeldung, der Herr mit der...
Is the gentleman with the glasses here on the right? Please keep it short and put it specifically to one of the panelists. I live near Zurich, and I have seen what a difficult time people are having in the south, and this has a lot to do with the difficulties of communication and the difficulties that they have with the corresponding firms. Now, Mr. Ruggi was saying that the NGOs, labor organizations, and the governments have to do their share, have to do their part. And it has been said that this can't be done without government help. Mr. Di Piazza, I would ask, therefore, governments are practically bankrupt. There's no country without debts. How then can you talk about neutral partnership or neutral partners with those who are indebted? And people with the debts are the ones who can be easily bribed. That's obviously true. So if you say that the first problem is terrorism, and the first problem for CEOs, you have to look into the causes of terrorism and how they can be reduced. And this certainly has to do with the worldwide production of weapons, with violence and so on. I think the question is clear, says the moderator. Could we have some responses, please?
The many aspects to your question. My observation that government and NGOs need to be part of the solution simply say that there are a number of different tacks that a government could take. A government could take ignoring the issue. A government could take extended regulation and restriction. I think the government needs to be part of the dialogue with the NGO, with business, around setting standards in a way that is not regulatory. Instead, it's constructive. You might not agree with voluntary, but I think voluntary with disclosure far exceeds the possibility that can be changed from a heavy regulatory environment. And I do believe that business is looking for these solutions. We operate in 142 countries. We operate in many of the countries that have been mentioned here today. And our people in each of those countries are actively engaged in trying to find the solutions because we endorse the principles under the Global Compact. And I think business is looking for help in a constructive way, not for an environment of restrictive regulation. Instead, on these issues, how do we find a way to make the situations better? In some countries, and you referenced the South, it is very difficult for business to operate and change. I think my colleague from Nestle made it clear. We do what we can do to protect our own people, create environments to protect our own people in those environments, and in the process we try to change the environment of those countries.
Herr Deiss, als Vertreter eines
Mr. Deiss, as a representative of a bankrupt state.
Eines verschuldeten Staates.
Well, a state with debts, I would say, not exactly bankrupt. Well, in reality, there are many states, it is true, where there's no longer any government, where the state is virtually bankrupt. And our task there, first and foremost, is to provide help through development assistance to help firms to incur risk and to do business. And the issue there is to help them to build social society, and this can be done locally, regionally, and it can be done nationwide. That's where I see the need for collaboration between state and the private sector by working together to promote development. Thank you very much. A second question here, the gentleman on the left side, Gothenburg, and in Germany. We very much support the Global Compact for the government. It is in a phase where I think it's in great danger because expectations are very high. And the Global Compact in New York has to realize that this is a new case of public-private partnerships, and it can only work if both parties are prepared to share the risks and the costs. And it isn't yet clear on the private sector side that there is this commitment. And there needs to be an initiative on the private side which would make it clear the strength of commitment, and it has to be backed with material and financial support. the moderator, do you actually want to put a question to one of the panelists? Well, Mr. Brabeck, of course, this goes to you because you're concerned with the German Friends of the Global Compact, and you are certainly already concerned with the practical implementation of these. Thank you very much. If you would pass the microphone on to the young lady next to you. Just a minute, just a minute. I thought you wanted to move on to the next questioner. No, you're supposed to say something too. Well, it's obviously very clear that if we want to collaborate in the Global Compact, we also have an additional responsibility to work with governments and NGOs too. And believe me, it's not that easy, but we're doing it anyway. Let me give you an example. Look at the story about Ethiopia. Certainly this is not an easy one because we were somewhat surprised by a legal question which went back to 1977. And this was a matter which was dealt with on the level of lawyers. And then there was a demonstration in London which brought this to my attention. We looked closely at this case, and we realized that it's probably very important for Ethiopia, one of the poorest countries of the world, that there should be a legal environment in place where nationalization takes place. And of course, every country has a right to nationalize industries, but that's done in good and due form and legal form. And I can tell you that this morning we have reached agreement with Ethiopia and jointly with Oxfam. That was an NGO which had mounted such a spectacular attack on us. We have concluded an understanding that in collaboration with the government, with the NGOs and with ourselves, we have come to a settlement which is good for the country, which preserves the legal principles and recognizes those principles. And this is a typical sign of how the Global Compact can work if you really try. And maybe this is just one example among many. Thank you very much. I'm from the Campaign for Human Rights. It seems to be that the problem about the Global Compact is that there's no checks, and there's no possibility of sanctions. It's all based on promises. It's based on trust. And then we had this case, we had the mention of transparency, and the problem in Colombia late last year, more than 300 tons of milk powder were confiscated, and there was, again, this involved Nestle, and this was an infringement of the law. And if I look at the business principles of Nestle, I have to ask, how we as consumers can have any trust in these principles? Well, I think there's only one who can answer that question. Yes, of course. The problem of the milk powder in Colombia is a relatively easy one to answer. The milk powdered milk, came from Uruguay, and it had a shelf life of 18 months and could only be used industrially thereafter. And if it isn't used, in fact, the shelf life is only 6 months if it's not to be used industrially. Now we have there's a new plan for the government whereby they can only import powdered milk for industrial purposes. In which case you have the 18-month shelf life or expiry date, and things are absolutely in order. When it's used industrially as part of an industrial process, then there is no problem of food security. Well, says the moderator, what about a case study in the Learning Forum concerning the powdered milk? That might be a good example. And you could then go into greater detail on these various aspects. Mr. Brabeck, well, we had a recent meeting with Carl Bellamy, and we have another meeting with WHO, where we will continue to discuss this question of the powdered milk. So I think we've made some good progress here. But of course, we shall continue to discuss this issue. Well, perhaps you can negotiate with the lady about the exact date. The gentleman in the middle there.
I'm not in any organization, so I'm just a human being, so that's all right. A question to all of you, gentlemen. I heard the word sustainability in the context of economics. How would actually an economy look like when it would be sustainable? Could you give me a picture of that, a clear picture? And another comment on Mr. Brabeck and Nestle. I think some of those accusations are really exaggerated and a bit out of. But basically, what is there is just a mistrust. And I think as long as you are not capable as CEO of that big company to create that trust, you have to still work and learn more, as you said yourself, no? To build that trust. And I don't know. You have to admit that. You have to move on. Because when you do your best, with a good heart, then there's no that kind of accusation, attacking you. That's just okay. That's it.
Also, wer will da ein Bild?
Well, who wants to present a picture of a sustainable economy? Very briefly, Mr. Stigson.
I can try. One thing that we suffer from is that our knowledge about our ecosystems is actually very limited, and therefore we don't know what a real sustainable society looks like. We can point at building blocks, we can point at a number of the bits and pieces of the puzzle, but the challenge is in better understanding our world is what is going on in a number of studies. That is what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is trying to do on climate change. There is now a big study on the Millennium Ecosystems Assessment, trying to understand the ecosystems. So we are actually moving forward without really knowing how the world is functioning, and we don't know if we are close to any real points in time where there can be step changes in the way the world is working. And we are then trying to find ways of dealing with resource efficiency, dealing with a number of issues to try to make this a more sustainable world. But we are on a journey, and what the end point looks like, we don't know. And that is why often the debate is about sustainable development, because we're talking about a journey and shooting for the long-term sustainability that we at this point in time cannot really define.
Gut, und der Journey geht weiter bei Bundesrat Deiss.
So, Mr. Deiss. Well, perhaps I could venture an attempt. Sustainable would mean if your children and your children's children and all subsequent generations could have the same life that you enjoy today. And that doesn't just mean the environment, that also means social sustainability, and also perhaps for this forum, it means economic sustainability. In other words, the coming generations will have jobs and will be able to spend their lives decently. Well, for me, sustainability is defined very simply. If your great-grandfather, your grandfather, you yourself and your children continue to be faithful Nestle consumers, then you will have sustainable jobs. And that is the case of over 5 billion human beings in the world. One thing you have not to forget, you really can't expect that everybody, every human being in the world is going to be 100% happy with Nestle, but we have to make a distinction between what we are doing, and we've got very, very trusting consumers, and that we are, and that is, of course, a multinational company. And a lot of people aren't in agreement with what we are, but with what we do, I would say that's our greatest asset. I mean, even the most active and aggressive NGOs have never accused us of not producing 100% safe milk products. And so that's why we've got a sustainable firm.
Wenn Sie 140 Jahre lang
when you're in business for 140 years, then that means something. The voice from the audience can't be interpreted because it has no microphone.
Und die Trinkwasserflaschenproduktion haben, dann nennen Sie das.
And then do you call that sustainable? Is that did I really hear right? We have nothing to do with providing drinking water in Mexico.
Gut, die Frage ist verstanden. Bitte.
Okay, the question is understood, says the moderator. Do you have anything else to say? Well, once again, this is an accusation which is completely beside the point. We've never been in that business. There are other firms engaged in the supply of drinking water. Well, I think we've overstepped our time a little bit, but I think Mr. Schwab is here for almost a week, and perhaps he's getting homesick. Perhaps we can continue. Okay, we'll take two more questions. Could I invite the lady in the red dress in the back there? And then the last question would be the gentleman right at the back, who I'm afraid I overlooked him because he was so far off. And the lady in red first.
My name is Danielle Gosteli. I am from Amnesty International Swiss section. I have a very concrete question. Everybody agrees at the podium that the advantage of the Global Compact is bringing together people from NGOs, government, and NGOs and companies together. But governments are also following up in their own countries the results of the discussions within the Global Compact. So I was wondering, taking the example of Colombia, who has been very much discussed, as a typical country with the topic business and human rights in zones of conflict. I think there were in New York a learning forum on this topic. I wonder what are now the follow-ups on this issue, and I wonder what the Swiss government wants to do. I knew that the Swiss government is willing to play a proactive role in Colombia, but I would like to know if it's possible for you to integrate also business and Swiss companies within the dialogue with the government in Colombia to try to find a solution. Thank you.
Gut, also wir haben die Frage ja schon
Well, we've had that question raised before. I wonder whether Mr. Dice has anything else to say. Well, I have the feeling that this question is moving into the political sphere, and also the terrible civil war which raged for more than a decade in Colombia. And from negotiations with the FLN and with the FARC, I know that there were negotiations, and we were also involved in the 5 and 10 country groups, respectively. But unfortunately, these negotiations were then broken off. However, we continue to be ready to help to the extent that we can. It would seem that it's through the United Nations and a special envoy of the Secretary General. Attempts are being made to pick the thing up again, and we're ready to help. But I think it's difficult in this political phase to bring businesses into this. Of course, if we have the opportunity to help, we will do that in certain areas. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment among the panelists? Well, in that case, can we have our last question, the gentleman right at the back?
Thank you very much. My name's Fred Higgs. I'm the General Secretary of the International Confederation of Chemical, Energy, Mines and General Workers' Unions, representing some 20 million members across the world. I'm also a member of the Global Compact Advisory Council, and I must say that I am quite disappointed that the organiser of this event never made sure that they had a Labour representative on the panel, which I think could have been useful, particularly in the debate that was going on with Colombia. Let me just say on Colombia, before I make one other comment, if I could. 140 trade union activists were killed in Colombia last year. A lot of them in the sectors I represent, and I've been to Colombia on that issue many times. It was implied by one of the speakers, Keith, that in fact companies should consider pulling out of Colombia. Well, I can tell you there's no worker organisations in Colombia that say companies should pull out. That's not what they're asking for. So I think you've got to be very careful before comments like that are made. Let me just say, within the labour movement, no one's got no illusions about the Global Compact. We do not see it as something that's going to solve all the problems. Certainly not going to solve all the problems in Colombia, but there's many other UN agencies doing their best there as well. But what the Global Compact is a way in which business, labour, civil society can come together within a voluntary initiative. It should not, and hopefully never will, be seen as a replacement for legal rights in relation to human rights, trade, labour law and so forth. So I think it's an initiative that's got its limitations, but having been on the Advisory Council, things like grounds for expulsion are being discussed at the moment very, very actively. And it's a dynamic thing. It's only been going for 2 years, and it is going to change, and hopefully change for the better. And that's one of the areas in which I think there'll be significant change. Thank you.
Das war jetzt keine Frage.
Well, that wasn't a question, but rather a contribution to the discussion from somebody who was not invited up to the podium. I think it's quite right that you did add that statement. And now we come to our conclusion. I would like warmly to thank all of you. I think this was an excellent overview of what is effectively a new area, which is now actually coming into being. And I think it has become obvious that there is a potential there, but there are also still major problems visible in this collaboration. And I would like to thank you for your interest. I thank Bundesrat Dice and all the other gentlemen on the podium for an excellent discussion. Thank you.
Your last point, I agree with you. Translate